Okay, here we go. Oh, that's not the right one. Here we go. Alright, so I'm looking a little rough today. I haven't shaved in a while, but nevertheless, it is chapter 16. So, for the most part, it seems like everything's gone okay. Everybody's been able to access everything decently well from what I know. So this is the last kind of lecture. After this lecture, you just have thought paper number 4 to turn in, and your career day paper, and your quiz, and then you're done. No finals, no final presentation, no final test or exam after you do those 3 things. So again, quiz number 5, thought paper number 4, and your career day paper. After you do those 3 things, you're good. So let's do the lecture. So again, it is the last lecture, thought paper number 4. Excuse me. Due the 16th at midnight. The syllabus says 11 a.m. That's what we used to do in class, but if you get it in by midnight, that's totally fine with me. Quiz number 5 on Tuesday. Again, it's going to be open all day. You have all day to take it. Please email me if you have any questions, comments, or you run into any difficulties. And then, like I said, last but not least, career papers due the 23rd. So, after all semester of, trying to make positives out of negatives, but, a lot of our information is very bleh, very divorce, very this, very death in the family, very, it's kind of sad, right? We talk about a lot of heavy stuff. But this last chapter is super quick, because it really sums up well that if you want to have a successful relationship, a successful marriage, a successful family, there are core patterns of how to do that, right? It's not going to go in depth about this theory or that theory. It's just, hey, if you want to make it work, here are some ways to make it work. So we've talked about commitment, right? We've talked about, commitment. Again, we've talked about this term in a very ethereal sense, again, by what it is not, right? We talk about bad things. We talk about domestic violence. We talk about this. We talk about that. We talk about divorce. We talk about what commitment is not. But instead of just focusing on what it is not, let's focus on what it is, right? So there is short-term commitment, and then there's long-term commitment, right? So a short-term commitment is, you could say, a semester of class. I'm signing up for CDFS 112. I am making a short-term commitment because I'm going to do this thing. I am going to be responsible. I'm going to do the quizzes, turn in the papers, but I know it has an end date, right? But there's also a long-term commitment, right? Now that could be, I'm going to sign up for this job, and I'm not getting rid of this job unless they fire me. I'm planning on being in this job for the next 40 years. Right? That's a long-term commitment. Well, relationships, right, are a short-term commitment at first, but then they turn into a long-term long-term commitment. I highly doubt that any of you, if you've gone on dates or you have a romantic partner right now, you probably didn't day number 1, right, first date, go like, all right, so this is it. Sign me up. Let's rock and roll. Right? You're my person. Like, no, that doesn't happen on the first date. If it does, red flag, right? That's not what that is. You start with a short-term commitment of oh, hey, you want to go on that second date? Sure. Short-term, and it builds into the long-term. No matter what, you need to have love, trust, and respect, right? So data research has shown that these are the 3 things that always come up, right? And some people can argue honesty, right, and intimacy, right? That's all super important. But nevertheless, when it comes from the data and other researchers, these are the 3 things that always come up: love, trust, and respect. Obviously, you got to respect your partner. You can't walk all over them. You got to trust them. And of course, it helps if you have that love there. If you have a high level of commitment to a relationship, that is usually the strongest predictor of relationship persistence. So again, high level of commitment is the strongest predictor of persistence. And again, that makes sense. If you are highly dedicated to, being a all-state athlete, then that would make sense that when you become the all-state athlete, people are going to say, oh, well, she was highly committed to being the all-state athlete, so that's why she did it. Of course their relationship has lasted 45 years. They've both been highly committed to each other, right? That should make sense. But what is commitment in an actual relationship, right? What does that commitment look like, right? We have our essentials for maintaining a committed relationship, but what is a commitment really like in a relationship? We can break those down into 3 types. There's a personal, moral, and structural. Your personal commitment is kind of your passion for that relationship, right? That's your personal commitment. Personal as in it is fulfilling to you to keep this relationship alive, right? Whether, again, you love that person, whatever, right? I'm not talking about the factors that make you want to maintain that relationship, but solely your personal commitment to that relationship is something that is inside of you and for you alone, right? No outside factors. It's your desire. Then there's a moral commitment, right? So now I want to really focus on this phrase, sense of duty. Right? So many folks, if we think about this historically, right, we talk about the colonial period going back all the way to chapter 1. Many folks back then didn't necessarily have a high personal commitment to their relationship, but they had a very high sense of moral and structural commitment. That, no, I've pledged myself to this person in the act of marriage or whatever it is, right? I have pledged myself to this person. I have a duty to stick with it through thick and thin, right? Till death do us part, quote unquote, right? That's a moral obligation, right? To finish what you started. And then lastly, this structural piece. This should make sense. If we talk about structural functional theory, right? This idea that things have their role, and when things are in their place and they're doing their job, their function, their purpose, things work out, right? So a structural commitment is recognizing that, hey, I've put in a lot of time and energy into this relationship to make it work for whatever reason, right? I would consider myself a failure if I bowed out now. All that time and energy into doing this goal is now moot, right? So I value the time and energy that I've put into maintaining this structure that is the relationship. Now, all 3 of these types are not just beneficial to the 2 people in the relationship. Duh, right? All of you have come from some kind of family. If these 3 things only affected your parents, right, you'd be in limbo. But no, when those 3 things worked for your parents or did not work for your parents, it affected you as a child, as a son, as a daughter, as a whatever, right? It affected you, right? So it's not only beneficial to the 2 committed people, but kids who are in relation or in families in which these 3 things are very high for those committed people, there's often fewer behavioral problems, right? So again, take this idea of what works in a relationship and contrast it to all semester what we're talking about, what doesn't work, right? And all of this should make sense. Now, of course, there are different factors that are going to affect these 3 things, right? So these are 3 types of commitment, but now what factors into what kind of commitment it is, right? Or if you even choose to have that commitment in the first place. Work is a huge factor in commitment, right? Many of your folks, probably when you were younger, had some sort of argument around jobs, around money, around working, right? It's completely normal to have those arguments and those conversations. Work is a very important part of life. But if you are a dual earner family, meaning both parents are working, right, that may have a strain on how you look at your own commitment. Maybe you have a high personal, commitment, but, the structure is falling apart a little bit because you're always working, right? And then we talked about work-family conflict in the past and how that may factor in to how you perceive your own commitment to a relationship based on work. Role perception, if we think back to one of the theories, symbolic interactionism, think back to this idea that your role, the purpose you play as a individual, as a cog in the machine, whatever that machine is, your workplace, your marriage, whatever, you have a role to play. And that role is not only based in various factors, but it's always being influenced by other people in the environment. Right? So what do I mean by this? Your commitment is going to be affected by how you perceive yourself in your relationship. How do you perceive your role? If you perceive yourself as, well, my opinion isn't really valued, or he doesn't really care about what I say, and you perceive your role to be that may affect your commitment later on. But if you perceive your role as, I'm an equal partner in this relationship, that's going to help. Sacrifice. Right? Again, we've talked about this before, that sometimes sacrifice is healthy, sometimes it's not healthy. You don't want to overly sacrifice yourself. You don't want to sacrifice your integrity as a human being for a relationship, right? Then that's not the right relationship. But sometimes you may have to have certain sacrifices to maintain your commitment. Your partner got a really good job with great benefits halfway across the country, but you really like your job. What do? Somebody makes that sacrifice, right? I'm not going to spend too much time on communication. That should make sense at this point. Health. I mean, that's a tough one that can sometimes, rub people the wrong way, but I mentioned it in these audio lectures and even in class that my dad, when he had his multiple sclerosis, when I was a young kid, his health had a severe influence on the family, right? It affected my parents' commitment, right? They didn't split up or anything like that, but it was difficult for my dad to be committed to normal relationship things because his health got in the way. And just like sometimes your health can get in the way, your attitude can get in the way as well. Right? Similar to role perception, your attitude towards whether you are willing to bear commitment or not will affect how committed you are to that relationship. So then, commitment within the changing family, the demographics of American society, the number of cohabiting, unmarried, and same-sex couples are what? What do y'all think? Should be pretty straightforward at this point. It's definitely increasing. Right? The family is changing. Day number 1, I asked all of you, what did you think about the family? Right? And every single one of you had some different idea of what a family was. Some different definition. Well, again, here we see that with the numbers of different kinds of families increasing, that definition is going to continue to change. What about types of couples? Right? What defines a family? Is it marriage? Is it kids? Is it both? Is it neither? Is it your love for a person? Is it your trust? Is it your comfort level? Is it your physical proximity? Is it your geographical location? Is it your heritage? Right? All of these different kinds of things. One of the things I wanted all of you to get out of this class is, again, this idea that family is this phenomena, this thing that we can all relate to, but it's really hard to pin down quite what it is. Right? There are so many different kinds of families that you need to make sure your mind is open to all these different types. But also remember what your family is and what you want your family to be. So hopefully you want it to be these things, right? You want it to be successful, right? Whether that is a marriage, whether that's a civil partnership, whatever, right? You want your relationships to be successful, to be healthy. Well, here are some things, right? If you want to save this lecture for the future and you're having relationship issues, come back to this lecture and be like, oh, poof, got it. These are the things I need to do, right? Not saying I'm some therapist, but this stuff helps. Communicate freely, communicate openly, and communicate, this is a big one, politely. Right? When somebody says, can I be honest with you? That doesn't mean be a dick, right? That's not what that means. Somebody says, can I be honest with you? Right? You should be honest, as in be free, be open, but be polite, right? Don't be mean. You can be honest and not be mean. Make sure you're communicating with the other person. Unselfishness, right? Duh. Be willing and ready to support the other person. If you're not, it's going to fall apart pretty quick. This is a huge one. Be a cheerleader, right? Support and encourage your partner, right? If it turns into a contest, if it turns into a game of trying to one-up your significant other, come on. No. Because eventually, if you are married to this person, their victory, newsflash, is your victory. Because you're tied to the person. So you want them to be as successful as they can be. If spirituality is a thing that applies to you and to your partner, you should share in that spirituality. But even beside that, every single person on the planet has a sense of values, some kind of moral code that they live by. And when we are talking about religious institutions, right, we're talking about couples that often stick together, share these basic moral values. Commitment, we just talked about. Be willing to engage in commitment. And then affection. Find ways to express affection, right? It doesn't always have to be physical affection. I think I've talked about love languages in class before, and many of you have probably already know what it is. But if you don't, highly suggest it. Google it. Love languages. It's just a really cheesy, I don't know if it's properly supported by science, but nevertheless, it's a helpful tool to just realize, hey, when I express love to somebody, what do I do? Am I a hugger? Am I a talker? Hey, buddy, you're great. Am I a gift giver? Let me give you something to show how great you are. Or am I doing something for you? Let me do the dishes. Right? Let me vacuum. Right? Let me wash your car without you having to ask. Or let me do something nice for you. Right? So there's these different kinds of ways you can express affection to somebody. But then you can also figure out what ways, when they're expressed to you, make you feel appreciated. Right? So it doesn't always have to be physical, but find ways to express that affection. Have fun. Right? Relationships should be fun. Many of you in class have even talked about your significant other as like your best friend. Right? Because there's this idea that you have fun with this person, that it's not It's not this Romeo and Juliet 24/7, 365. Sometimes you can just goof around and have fun with the other person. Relationships should be fun. Both of you should have the ability to cope, right? You should be able to find ways to manage times of crisis. If you are not able to get through tough times, then, well, newsflash, tough times are always going to show up. All of you know this by now. I mean, heck, look at what we're in right now. Tough times will always present themselves. And a successful relationship finds ways to healthily manage these crises. Trust, again, we mentioned that earlier, right? You've got to be able to depend on each other. In a similar vein to trust, you need to be able to share responsibility. We've talked about in the past families that struggle with sharing household duties, right? That if there are two people with 3 kids and one person is always taking care of the kids and the other person isn't, and there's resentment that begins to form, there's anger and frustration that builds, right? That's not going to be fun for a relationship. You need to be able to share responsibility so that both people feel equally valued and equally, engaged into what the relationship is. You need to be able to empathize, right? If you've become that entrenched with somebody, relationship, marriage, whatever, you become that close with somebody, you need to be able to empathize with them and understand their point of view when things are going wrong, right? If you're having an argument and you're only thinking of yourself, it's not going to go well. You need to be able to empathize with that other person. And then, kind of like the cheerleader bit, celebrate change, right? It's also similar to the ability to cope. Tough times are often the times that kind of create the most growth, right? No pain, no gain. Change can lead to growth. So if you're able to cope well and cheerlead each other through it, celebrate that change, right? Because there can be some really cool growth that comes out of it. So that's pretty much it. So some closing thoughts. Y'all were awesome. Thank you for sticking with the class. Thank you for hanging in there amongst this truly, hopefully, once in a lifetime experience that is the coronavirus, right? But y'all handled it like champs. I appreciate every single one of you. Y'all were awesome. I enjoyed teaching because you all had so many interesting comments in class. But y'all were fun. Seriously. If you would like to stay in touch, as cheesy as it is, LinkedIn is a real thing, right? So you can find me on LinkedIn. Of course, that's my email. You can please, if you need a reference, if you need advice, if you need, whatever, perspectives on jobs and careers, again, I don't know, whatever it is. If you would like to stay in touch, those are 2 ways you can easily contact me. That's it for the lecture. Again, y'all been great. Y'all been real. Please send me any questions, comments, concerns, as always. If there is nothing else, again, stay healthy out there. Try to enjoy the summer if we have one. And keep rocking it out. Thanks, y'all. Take it easy.